Get ready for your weekly dose of pixie dust with Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePauli, and today on the show I have Brian Glenn, the editor-in-chief of Inside Universal, joining me to discuss the Disney-owned properties found inside Universal Studios theme parks, and what the likelihood is of Disney gaining back theme park rights to the characters and franchises they own. Since the beginning of Universal Studios Florida, they've always licensed outside properties to use in their parks. Disney started doing this with Star Tours at Disneyland, and did it in a major way with the opening of Disney MGM Studios. But considering that Disney Parks and Universal Studios theme parks are the biggest competitors in the industry, it is a bit interesting to have now Disney-owned properties featured in the Universal Studios theme parks. Our conversation about this fascinating situation is coming your way right after this. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow. I love those lyrics from the classic Sherman Brothers tune and my favorite attraction at Magic Kingdom. Apparently, the folks at Who's It's and What's It's love the Carousel of Progress as well, because right now you can order your Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow t-shirt at who'sitswhatsits.com. Plus, you can save 15% off of that and anything and everything else you order just by using discount code DCTC at checkout. That's right, you can save 15% on all magically inspired apparel at who'sitswhatsits.com with code DCTC. Whether you're an attractions fan, animation fan, villains fan, and more, there's so much to choose from at who'sitswhatsits.com, and they're regularly introducing new merch. Make it real simple for yourself and simply click on the link in this episode's description, and don't forget to use code DCTC at checkout to save 15% off your entire order.
It's time to dive into today's Disney dialogue.
Hello, Brian, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
As the editor-in-chief of Inside Universal, I thought that you would be the perfect guy to speak with about the Disney-owned properties that can be found in Universal Studios parks, just because I find this to be such a fascinating topic of conversation.
It seems to be that anytime a new Marvel movie comes out, or in this case now, a new Marvel hit TV show, you see the discussion pop up online. Well, can this come to the parks? Can this come to the parks? And yeah, it's always fun to go over the contract with people and pick and choose what exactly can and can't come. But yeah, it's definitely one of those interesting conversations that always pops up.
Yeah, and you're based in Orlando, so like you really have way more limitations than me out here in Los Angeles. So that's really interesting. But one of the things I want to talk about first, before we jump into like the details of Disney and Universal, is just this concept of, you know, ever since I was a kid, you know, going to these parks, I didn't initially realize how like Universal Studios would license things from other studios to put in their parks. Like the one I always think of is Beetlejuice. I kind of always thought, oh, this must be a Universal movie because it's in a Universal park. And then as I got older, I was like, oh, wait a second, that's Warner Brothers? And then even more so, Disney MGM Studios hit like essentially every other studio except for Universal for obvious reasons. And is this something you were aware, or when do you first remember being aware of this fact?
I think it was Ghostbusters, and the original attraction at Universal, because I always, for the life of me, at least when I was younger, was like, oh, the same thing you did. That's a Universal movie, Ghostbusters. And then when it closed and they were going to bring in Twister, and I remember reading an article, I don't know why this sticks out of my head, but I remember reading an article basically saying they're bringing in Twister because it's a Universal-owned movie. And in my head, I'm like, wait, what? So that's a Universal-owned movie? Then what is Ghostbusters? And then finding out that, oh my God, it's not. But I think to this day, people still associate Ghostbusters with Universal, especially because a few years ago we had the Haunted House Ghostbusters, and everyone, again, jumped on, oh, that's a Universal movie. No, it's not.
Yeah, now, I gotta tell you, like, it actually bothers me. Even as a kid, it bothered me that the park is called Universal Studios. The park was called Disney MGM Studios, and it always drove me crazy. But I think you'll probably agree, the common person probably doesn't notice and or care, right?
Oh, no. As long as the product is good, they don't care where it comes from. It can come from New Line. As long as it's good, that's it. Does
it drive you nuts at all, or am I alone on this?
For Universal, no. Well, I guess now, lately, there was like a period at Universal where they kind of started fishing for other properties outside of their studios, and that was kind of like you have, before at this point, you have Fast and the Furious sitting there waiting to be turned into a ride. Now, now we all know how that turned out, but
yeah.
But yeah, so when they got Potter, obviously that was like, okay, now it makes sense. But it didn't really bother me. The Simpsons one kind of did, especially because I thought it was a little bit past its prime. Turned out I was wrong on that one too, because it turned out to be pretty profitable.
And it keeps going and going and going. And didn't they just get renewed for like another 2 seasons?
Yeah.
It's like unbelievable. It's crazy. The first one we're going to talk about today is Marvel Superhero Island, which of course opened with Islands of Adventure in the Universal Orlando Resort in 1999. Now, of course, this wasn't a problem in 1999. It wasn't until 2009 that the Walt Disney Company purchased Marvel. But this land, I was lucky enough to go to this park when it first opened. I remember going that opening year, and The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man is an epic attraction. Then you've got Doctor Doom's Fearfall, the Incredible Hulk coaster, Storm Force Accelatron, and it's just a fun little cool land. I don't know, how do you feel about the land overall? Do you feel like it's aged well?
No. Universal has done a good job renewing with Spider-Man and the Hulk coaster to bringing it to a more modern but still comic book level. Doctor Doom and Storm Force are still very much in that 90s sort of cartoonish thing. But at the end of the day, again, it seems like the general public don't care. They see Wolverine, they see Cyclops, and that's all they care about. So I don't think they ultimately care if it's from the 90s or the modern take.
Yeah, no, I think of everything we're going to talk about today, this is probably the property, the Marvel company, that Disney is probably most frustrated with Universal having in their parks. That would be my guess. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, like I said, the Walt Disney Company purchased Marvel in 2009. It's obviously been huge for the Walt Disney Company. But what exactly do we know about this contract that there is as far as Universal Studios theme parks and Marvel?
Well, it's hard to believe that back in 1999, or at least I think 95 or 94 when the contract was signed, Marvel was a dud. No one wanted to touch that.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It's impressive to think what the Walt Disney Company did with it, because I don't know, between 99 and 2009, I'm not a huge Marvel fan, so was anything going on between 99 and 2009, or did it really start to upswing once Disney bought them?
So this kind of goes hand in hand with how Marvel gave the rights to Universal. Marvel also wanted to make money and started giving away their rights to other film studios whoever would make their properties. That's why you had X-Men and Fantastic Four over at Fox and Spider-Man over at Sony. And it didn't really start taking off. Like, the X-Men movie in 2000 kind of did well enough where people's interest peaked up a little bit. But it wasn't until 2002 Spider-Man where it just went nuts. And that's when you had, Daredevil come out the next year. And then it was just comic book movie after comic book movie. And then in 2008 is when the first Iron Man came out, which kickstarted the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So when Disney purchased it in 2009, it was a big deal, but no one, I guess, realized how much of a big deal it would turn out to be because of how successful, obviously, the MCU became.
Yeah, okay, so when Disney purchased it, it was in a pretty good place. When Universal licensed it, it was in a real sad place.
Right.
Okay, so what do we know about this contract? Because the thing I always hear is that these Marvel characters that appear in the Universal parks cannot appear in a Disney theme park east of the Mississippi. I don't know how factual or detailed that actually is, but what do you know about this contract?
That is actually true.
Okay.
Basically, in perpetuity, as long as there is an open attraction at a Universal theme park, a competing theme park may not use the Marvel character.
Wow.
So that even qualifies because Japan has the Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man.
Yes.
So Disney
and Universal.
Right. So Disney's more than welcome to use any other Marvel character in Japan except Spider-Man.
Okay, so that's the deal. It's if the specific character exists in the land. So at this point, like, Universal can't just add another Marvel character, right? They licensed individual characters, not Marvel as like an overall umbrella.
Well, the official verbiage is in the character's family. So if it's, for example, Spider-Man, that counts Green Goblin, Venom, Dr. Octopus, Daredevil, whoever has been known to be a part of that comic. The big catch is with the Hulk coaster, with the Hulk being an Avenger, he falls into the Avengers family, and
oh my gosh,
that catches Iron Man, Thor, a lot of other people.
Wow. Okay, and this is when Disney ran into some issues with a monorail wrap that they had on a monorail that went through Epcot. Do you remember this?
I sure do.
Now, this is crazy. So, a monorail, which is, more of a means of transportation than an actual ride, the one that drives through Epcot had was it Avengers? I'm not even sure. It was some Marvel property with a wrapped advertisement on the monorail. And I don't know if Disney was like, hey, let's see how far we can go with this. If it were me, I wouldn't even thought of, it's driving through Epcot. We can't do this. I don't know. Which way do you think it went?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think it was Disney trying to push to see what they can get away with, and Universal sort of flexing their muscle and saying, no.
And they said no pretty quickly, right?
Yeah. I mean, I understand the monorail is essentially a method of transportation around the resort, but to a lot of people, it is also classified as a ride, quote unquote. So do you really want to spend the money to take that to court?
Yeah, it's so interesting because you don't load it inside Epcot. So, it's at outside the turnstiles. So to me, technically, it's not an Epcot ride. Yes, it drives through Epcot, but you don't board it in Epcot. But listen, I don't blame them for not going to court with it, but I find that's really fascinating to me that they're like, oh crap, we need to remove this wrap because, this property that we own, we cannot drive through our park. I wonder I'm sure it doesn't matter, but like with a bus wrap or something, if it pulls into the Epcot parking lot, are they in trouble there? I don't think so. I think they're safe there.
I think the catch was literally that it went through Epcot. That's
unbelievable.
That's why you saw future wraps go on the Magic Kingdom, the resort loop, because it doesn't technically go through a theme park.
So funny, sad, scary. It would drive me nuts. Honestly, listen, obviously the Marvel deal worked out really well for Disney. They've made $1 kajillion owning it. But I think I would really have fought for something in the contract that said, look, Universal, you got 10 more years of this, and then you gotta change that land. I would have fought for that so hard, or strong-armed them. So
there is verbiage in the contract that states that Universal does have to keep it fresh. They don't let it turn to I don't want to say I don't want to say crap, but the thing is, can Universal add a character? That's sort of iffy, but it doesn't seem Disney necessarily has a ground to stand on to fight it. If they could,
yeah.
Because technically, like, for example, if they really wanted to have Ant-Man, now I don't think we'll be seeing a Paul Rudd version of Ant-Man in Islands of Adventure, but they could have a comic-based version of Ant-Man. And as long as that represents the comic, I don't think Disney has a leg to stand on to say, you can't.
Oh, it's fascinating and frustrating all at the same time. This kind of that situation reminds me of when Disney bought the Muppets. one of the things, kind of the opposite here, one of the things that frustrates me with that is the Jim Henson Company cannot use Kermit the Frog, which I get for new projects. What drives me nuts is when Kermit needs to be edited out of past Henson Company projects. And let's face it, Kermit was like a host for many TV specials and stuff. And it kind of reminds me of that. I'm like, I'm going to assume somebody thought of these things because there's far smarter people than me who work at these companies, but I can't believe that it just was allowed to move forward without these stipulations in place. It's kind of bonkers to me.
I do know in the development for Islands of Adventure, they were circling DC Comics, and I'm sure we've all seen the concept art and all that. When that deal fell through, I think Universal really wanted to be aggressive with the next rights holder they were speaking with. Mm-hmm. And again, as I stated earlier, Marvel was just in a very dark place. So I think they were happy that someone came up to them and said, like, we want to build a theme park based on your characters. Please have it all.
Yeah. And listen, it's a great land. Like the Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man is, to this day, I think one of the greatest theme park attractions that there are. Like, I think they've updated it a bit. It's held up really well. I still think it's really fun. I can't believe it. What is this now? 22 years old. We're coming up on for that attraction. To me, that is still like an e-ticket, to use a Disney term, attraction. I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it says a lot that it's, for a lot of people, that's the bar whenever a new ride comes out.
Yeah, it's very, very, very good. Now, so what characters can be used at Walt Disney World? We're seeing Guardians of the Galaxy being brought into the parks.
Disney lucked out by Guardians of the Galaxy being the hit it was, because Guardians of the Galaxy does not fall into any of the families that are at Universal. But I don't know how accurate this is, but I've noticed the lack of Drax in all concept art. Drax technically falls into the Avenger family.
Interesting.
So the lack of Drax has been something that I've been keeping an eye on. I don't know if they can skirt around that or if that's purposely left out.
Wow. Okay, so what other properties are there that, like, Disney has done something with that they could put in their parks? They could do WandaVision now, right, at Walt Disney World?
Nope.
No? Why not?
Wanda falls under two families.
Avengers?
X-Men and Avengers, and Vision is Avengers.
Oh, no.
Doctor Strange, I think, is available.
Wow.
Now, the other thing is, because I know a lot of people, when Black Panther came out, were wondering if they can be a Wakanda land. Mm-hmm. I don't know if parts of the characters, like origins and stuff, fall into that. So basically, I don't know if Disney could say, okay, here's Wakanda, but I know they can't use any of the characters from Wakanda. So my point was always, do you really want to build Wakanda without its king? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think they've learned that maybe with Galaxy's Edge, not being able to see as many Star Wars characters as some people might like. So my guess is they've learned the lesson that characters are integral when it comes to these different lands.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's bonkers. So basically right now we got Guardians of the Galaxy. Of course, they're building the Cosmic Rewind in Epcot. They had a show with the characters in Epcot as well. Let's hop over to the West Coast, though, and talk about Avengers Campus for a second, opening hopefully soon in Disney California Adventure. Now, the interesting thing about this is the land is called Avengers Campus. Correct me if I'm wrong. Are they not allowed to use the name Marvel? Even though we're all the way on the West Coast, we're not even near Universal Florida?
That's good. I'm glad you brought that up because it actually just escaped my mind. True, that's true. They cannot market the land no matter where it is, where it's located. They cannot use the Marvel name in the theme park. They can use the characters, but they can't use the Marvel name. That's why the marathon, I believe, was the superhero marathon and not the Marvel.
I mean, this is insanity. It truly, truly is insanity. Oh, gosh. Listen, at least there's ways around it. At least here, all over the world, other than Florida, they can use the characters. Although you were saying, where was the other Spider-Man attraction for Universal?
In Japan.
Okay, so can they do Marvel stuff in the closest park to that Universal, do you know, for Disney parks?
Tokyo Disneyland?
Yeah, could they do anything Marvel? Or does that contract go beyond?
They can do everything but Spider-Man.
Okay, wow. All right. Speaking of Spider-Man, I find this super interesting that, technically the first attraction that's part of Avengers Campus is Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, but the one to open with the land fully is Web Slingers, a Spider-Man adventure. And listen, I get this. Spider-Man is a super popular character. Even myself, who does not consider himself to be a Marvel fan, very much enjoys the Spider-Man movies, and I've always liked that character all the way back to the Tobey Maguire films. But why would they choose that character when they know that Universal has a phenomenal Spider-Man attraction that everybody is going to compare this with? I found this to be shocking.
I honestly don't know. I 100% agree with you. It's one of those bizarre decisions that, like we said, the Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man is the bar for many theme park enthusiasts. So do you really want to go up against that?
Yeah, I've heard a story from an Imagineer who said, after Marty Sklar, the guy who used to run Imagineering, the late Marty Sklar, he called his Imagineering friend, who I won't name, but he said to them, Universal now has the best ride that there is, after he experienced The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man when that park first opened. That's some pretty hefty words if that story is indeed true. So I don't know. I can't imagine. I think the technology might be better. Obviously, we're talking 20 plus years later. It sounds like there's some interesting technology, but as far as a ride experience, they have a really, really high bar to leap. I think it's an interesting choice.
I guess the other thought is, do you want to compete with that? If you're really trying to make a Spider-Man ride on the same level as Universal Spider-Man ride, and then it turns out to not be as well received. You know what I mean? Is that we don't want to go toe to toe and then end up on the losing side, or we just want to play it safe? We just need Spider-Man because everybody loves Spider-Man. We don't care how, weak it looks against the e-ticket.
Listen, I do get the desire to have Spider-Man. Like I said, he's a character that I think everybody knows, even if you're not a Marvel fan. So I do get that. I just, I think it's a little crazy, but it's interesting. I'm excited to check out Web Slingers whenever Avengers Campus opens. I do want to mention, just for West Coast Universal Hollywood Spider-Man representation, back in the day, there was a show called Spider-Man Rocks at Universal Studios Hollywood. I actually, long before I lived here, I did get to experience this show once while on vacation. Did you ever see this?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it, no.
Oh my gosh, it was in the same space, right? These days it's the special effects stage. Before that we had, Creature from the Black Lagoon, the musical. They've had some really interesting performances in that space. It was, of course, for Beetlejuice Graveyard Review for a long time. But Spider-Man Rocks, that was a doozy, I'll tell you. It was interesting.
Yeah, I seemed like that was a way to capitalize on Spider-Man, because I think that premiered right as the movie came out. Mm. And I think they just rushed something out, because there was a time limit for Universal to introduce Marvel characters into their theme parks. That's why Hollywood lost out.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So now, if Universal were to decide, hey, we're done with the Marvel land, or there's something that Disney works out with them, if they were going to retheme this land, have you heard any rumors, and or do you have any things that you would like to see, assuming they're going to keep the basic, skeleton of the land? The coaster's going to stay, it's just going to be rethemed, etc.
I know this will upset a lot of Disney fans that want Marvel to come to Orlando, but there are no rumors for Universal to ditch it. It's the best and worst thing that can happen to Disney is for the Marvel Cinematic Universe to keep doing what it's doing, and Universal just reaping in all the benefits without having to acknowledge that there's an MCU.
Yeah, I've heard the merch sales in that land at Universal are through the roof. Not quite Harry Potter, but does very, very well for that park. So that alone is reason enough for them to keep it. I have heard rumors, and I have no idea how true this is, but Universal, Studios has been trying to make the Wicked film for a very long time.
Oh,
and
that rumor.
So where did that come from?
I have heard the rumor too from other people, not from people that I trust. But I have heard it, not for replacing Marvel. I think that's something that just got lost in translation. Honestly, I think that was birthed when the Disney Company purchased Marvel in 2009. Because back then, a lot of people were wondering, well, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, it was more of a wishful thinking thing, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I will admit, the Hulk could be turned into Defying Gravity. We got a green coaster. And then the other thing is Stormforce Accelatron is basically the teacups. That could be turned into a Twister attraction sort of thing.
Right.
A tornado sort of things. I don't know. It'd be interesting. But that means the Wicked movie would have to be a hit. We saw how Cats went. So who knows what will happen with Wicked if it ever gets made. But yeah, very, very interesting. Let's move on from Marvel and start talking about The Simpsons and the whole Springfield area that we have at both Universal Studios Hollywood and Florida. They showed up there in 2008. And of course, at the time when that happened, Disney did not own The Simpsons, but it was part of the 21st Century Fox acquisition in 2019. So for a couple of years now, Disney has owned The Simpsons. I think, well, first of all, this ride should have never happened because Back to the Future should have never left, but I'll just leave that. I'll just leave that there. We don't have to discuss that today. But, the really funny thing about this is just how many Disney jokes there are. Just little jabs and pokes at Disney in that attraction. How ironic that it's in a universe, it's in their biggest competitor's theme park and they're being poked fun at. It's crazy.
Well, you have the movie too that pokes fun of being owned by evil corporation, and then he's dangling with the mouse ears.
Was it the movie? I'm not super familiar with the TV show The Simpsons or the movie, but at one point there was like the joke of Disney buying Fox. Do you remember this? I
think that was the TV show.
Okay.
There was a line in the movie where Bart does make a crack about being owned by an evil corporation, but. Okay. But of course, The Simpsons has predicted everything, so I'm not surprised at this point.
One of the things I love in this attraction are these little Disney jabs. When you're in the queue, you're of course, you're entering Krusty Land, so his crazy theme park, and you're seeing advertisements for some of the attractions that are supposedly part of Krusty Land. One of them is the Haunted Condo, which, has a poster design very similar to what we see with the Haunted Mansion, which I find funny. We have the Hall of the Secretaries of the Interior, which of course is poking fun at the Hall of Presidents. And then in the actual ride, there's this whole Captain Dinosaur's pirate ripoff section, which is very, very, very similar to Pirates of the Caribbean. This is wild to me. I mean, this is almost more offensive than the whole Marvel thing. It's crazy.
Yeah, and now they own it, and the joke's still there.
Which, good on Disney for that. I will say that. It's not like, even when they put the show on Disney Plus or something, it's not like they don't have a sense of humor about it. They could easily be like, hey, any of those episodes with those Disney jokes, remove them or cut them, remove the episode or cut them out of the episode or whatever. They could do that if they wanted, and they don't. And that's cool. I don't think they would have any say over the ride. I don't think they could,
no.
make any changes to that whatsoever. But those are in both parks.
Yeah.
Are very large lands. I mean, in Orlando, even bigger because they have Kang and Kodo's Twirl and Hurl, which is essentially a Dumbo type of ride. But, we don't have that here in Hollywood. But they both take up a good amount of real estate. They have lots of stores, lots of food, and of course, the ride.
Right.
I'm going to assume this must drive Disney a bit crazy as well.
There is an end date on this one.
Oh, there is? What's the end date?
So it is not published, but it is believed that the standard contract was for 20 years. And that would put it in 2027. Wow. So now the flip side is we also don't know the renewal stipulations. So can Universal renew without Disney saying anything? Like, okay, we had a stipulation for an auto-renew, now we get it for another 20 years? Or does Disney have the saying like, all right, no, we want you to pull it out? Now, the good news, if you want The Simpsons ever to show up in Disney, is that the ride system will be approaching 40 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Simpsons itself, I think, will be approaching 40 years old. So does Universal want to keep going with that property on a very old attraction? Or do they look and say, okay, enough's enough. We got our money from this. I know Springfield's a huge moneymaker for them.
I was going to say, once again, I would imagine the merch sales for Springfield are probably pretty good.
Yeah, the Fast Food Boulevard was a huge win for them.
Well, that's interesting, though. I didn't realize that kind of had a potential end date. So that's, here's a question. Do you think that they belong in the Disney parks? Do you want them in the Disney parks?
No, I think because especially by the time that rolls around, like a lot of people, especially like I love The Simpsons growing up, but I don't think since season 10 they've been any good. I mean, every now and then they'll have a good episode, and of course the movie was entertaining, but I think they're just keeping on because it's like tradition at this point. Like,
it does seem like it would be a weird world without The Simpsons in some way. I mean, there are a lot of people on this earth who have had new episodes of The Simpsons their entire lives. Like, It's kind of crazy. But yeah, you were talking about the ride system. I gotta say, I don't think the ride system is old, but I actually think it's still a pretty fun and exciting ride system. The thing that bothers me about it is the film. The projector never seems very clear. The film is weird. That's the argument I would have with it. If they gave it a proper facelift, I actually think it would still be a very, very fun attraction. But once again, it should have stayed Back to the Future. But I don't know. I think it's a really fun ride. Do you not? Well, it's a fun ride system.
I don't get motion sick on any rides, but for some reason on that one I do.
Yeah, I get that.
One of the last times I rode The Simpsons, there was, I think it's pretty jerky. And one of the last times there was an E-stop right as it was simulating falling. So it was at a weird angle when it E-stopped and my back just got yanked back and slammed against the back of the seat. So I wasn't feeling very good for a couple of days.
Oh, so you've had great experiences with The Simpsons, right? It is a bumpy ride, more so than Back to the Future, I think.
Yeah, I think when they wanted to create Back to the Future, the legend has it is that, okay, they saw Star Tours and, okay, how do we go bigger? And that's why we have those big IMAX dome screens. Now we're at the point where bigger isn't necessarily better. Mm-hmm. Even though it's great for capacity. Like you said, the screen can get little janky looking. So, so that's why I think, Universal has a history of saying, okay, when it's time to move on. They don't seem to be holding on to the nostalgia like Disney parks. And that, you can have arguments whether that's a good or bad thing. But for Universal's history, when they're ready to move on for the latest and greatest property, they're like, all right, let's do this all in.
So the thing that I find most interesting about The Simpsons and Disney is, like, initially I would have thought to myself, oh, there's no way we're going to see The Simpsons in a Disney park, like, aside from the Universal contractual problem. But I was shocked, like, very soon after Disney bought The Simpsons, they had the characters appearing at the D23 Expo at the Disney convention. And I was like, wow, they are, like, wholeheartedly welcoming them into the family. And they even put them on Disney Plus. In fact, they were a big part of the marketing campaign for Disney Plus, which shocked me. I thought they'd go to Hulu or something, which Disney also controls. So I was quite surprised at how willing and accepting Disney was to bring The Simpsons into the family. And honestly, it makes me think that when the time comes that it leaves the Universal parks, I wouldn't be that surprised if we find something Simpsons related in a Disney park, which just feels weird to me.
Well, I know, especially when we're around our age, the Simpsons back then were very edgy. Mm-hmm. And nowadays that edge is very dull.
Okay.
So I think for us, we always think of The Simpsons, oh, that's the edgy show that we grew up with. But, in recent years, when you look back on it, it's like, okay, well, it doesn't push the envelope like it used to. The one that was surprising to me was Family Guy, because that's been known to be more off the cuff and a little bit more crass. And they had them at, I think, D23 do a promo for Disney Plus.
Jeez. It's
That was
crazy.
what I was like, okay, all right, so we're going all in.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Now, those are two properties, of course, that still exist in the Universal Studios theme parks today that Disney now owns. But let's move on to something that people may not always think about, and that's Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios, because in the past they have had quite a few properties that Disney now owns, which is really interesting. Of course, a lot of this was because of Disney purchasing 21st Century Fox in 2019. With that, they now own FX, the TV channel, and FX is home of American Horror Story, which was, part of Halloween Horror Nights in 2016 and 2017 in Orlando and Hollywood. I find this equally fascinating to think. I mean, this could drastically change Halloween Horror Nights.
I think it mostly impacts wish lists, and
Sure.
that's for Alien, because a lot of people have always clamored for an Alien house, and while we did get Alien versus Predator, it wasn't an Alien house.
Yeah.
So, usually Halloween Horror Nights, unless it's a outright classic, like the classic slashers of Freddy, Jason, Leatherface, which is why we always see it repeated. Halloween Horror Nights usually picks up what's hot at the moment and then moves on. I think American Horror Story was a product of that was the latest new thing, but also we're tired of doing The Walking Dead. Please give us something new.
Yes. Oh my God. Walking Dead went on forever.
And, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, I know, is one that's brought up a lot. As I'm a huge fan of not only the movie, but the whole audience participation. A lot of other people weren't in on the joke. And that actually got a lot of complaints. And, it was funny. It got to a point that I would go watch the show, not just to see the performances, but just to see and sit who's staying for the first 10 minutes before they bail.
Yeah, Rocky Horror Picture Show is interesting because I didn't realize how long of a run it had in Orlando. They did a Rocky Horror Picture Show from 2008 to 9 and then 2013 to 14 in Orlando. And in Hollywood, I believe it was just 2009. And it was an abridged version. It certainly wasn't the whole movie, but it was, a party show sort of atmosphere. And one of the things that I find so interesting about this is that after Disney purchased Fox, they canceled and denied future screenings of Fox properties. So like if a movie theater wanted to screen an older Fox movie, they were canceling and denying those. And of course, there are a lot of like small independent movie theaters around this country that really survive on midnight screenings of Rocky Horror Picture Show and the whole interactive show. And Disney at first was pulling that from being a possibility, and it was pretty quickly reversed. It was like the one exception where they said, all right, Rocky Horror Picture Show will still license that. But other than that, they kind of took it away. So if they're playing that game, like, let's face it, it's never coming back to Universal Horror Nights.
Oh, no. I think they got, at least Universal, they got what they wanted out of the properties. And it's funny, you mentioned, just a quick side note, Rocky Horror Picture Show. That was actually one of my parents' first dates. The midnight show. But yeah.
I'll tell you a secret. I've never gone to see, I did Horror Nights, but I've never gone to a proper screening of it. And I was supposed to, literally the week before pandemic shutdown, I was going to a Rocky Horror. Yeah. So I still gotta check it off the bucket list.
Yeah, it's interesting. I enjoy it, but I also acknowledge that it's very, very quirky.
Yeah, it's a horrible movie, but I'm sure that the energy of the audience is a lot of fun. I'm sure.
Oh,
at least
yeah.
I think it's a horrible movie.
Yeah,
maybe you feel differently.
Yeah, it's and the pantheon of filmmaking. It's at the bottom, but I mean, yeah, I get you.
Yeah.
But as I was gonna say, as far as Universal and Horror Nights, it locks out Fox properties, but Universal has a good relationship with AMC after the years of The Walking Dead, WB. And
Well, here's the interesting about WB though, and I don't know how far this will go, but for a couple years, Warner Brothers was throwing their own Halloween event here in Burbank, California, literally 5 across the street from Universal, pretty much. And I was wondering, I think they only did it like a few years. It never really took off. It was definitely never on the scale of Horror Nights, but it did start making me wonder, is Warner Brothers going to stop allowing certain properties, all of those classic New Line characters, which Warner Brothers owns, are they going to stop letting Universal use them, at least in Hollywood? Because that's an even bigger deal, I think, than the Fox properties that Disney owns.
I would have said yes 2 years ago until AT&T and Time Warner merged. And it seems like AT&T is less about their intellectual properties and more about the technology side.
Yeah, they'll make money any way they can. They'll sell that stuff off.
Right.
Or
So,
at least lease it.
Even before the pandemic obviously affected the world last year, I'd already heard Horror Comes Home was done. Yeah,
they didn't do it last year or the year before. Last year because of the pandemic, obviously. And was the year before canceled? I think it was. If I'm remembering.
Yeah.
The Warner Brothers event we're talking about. Yeah.
Right. It's all a blur now after March 2020.
Yeah.
Things start to blend.
Yeah, I know that they didn't make money off of it. I know that it was a very expensive thing that they did and it was not profitable. I know that certain people at the company were willing to like kind of ride it out until it became profitable because they wanted to see it become a thing. Because let's face it, they're seeing Universal make a ton of money across the street. They hadn't figured out their formula yet. But yes, I had heard as well that they're, especially with AT&T, they're like, you're losing money. We're stopping this.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But that was kind of something that popped in my head because the New Line properties are great. Not only Freddy, Jason, Leatherface, but now we're talking Conjuring. And is Insidious New Line? I can't remember. But New Line does a ton of horror movies. So that would have been bad for Universal. You mentioned Alien vs. Predator. I just want to say that was 2014 and 15 in Hollywood, as well as 2014 in Orlando. And there was even a Buffy the Vampire Slayer maze, I guess, in 2007 in Hollywood called Buffy and Angel. And of course, that's Fox as well. So I don't think we're seeing that. And was there just a Buffy reboot as well? Or is there talk of one? There's reboots of everything. I can't keep track anymore.
Yeah, there probably is. And it's coming to Netflix soon.
Yeah, right. Now, something fascinating from Halloween Horror Nights was something called Maximum Carnage. And this took place in Marvel Superhero Island. So back over in Islands of Adventure, they did Halloween Horror Nights over there. This was 2002. And Maximum Carnage was essentially the villains from Marvel took over. We saw dead superheroes. The main villain was Carnage, which is a character from Spider-Man. And I mean, Marvel got angry at Universal. This was way before Disney owned them, but Marvel got angry at Universal for showing like dead superheroes. And they felt that this was bad branding for them. And this is just fascinating as well.
Yeah, that was actually my first year at Horror Nights.
Oh,
and
cool.
One of the big reasons I went was like, oh, Marvel characters and they're bad. Oh, I'm in. But yeah, it was actually a really great scare zone. Universal, that was its first year in Islands of Adventure, so they kind of did the evil version of each land. So, in Jurassic Park, it was mutated dinosaurs, and in Toon Lagoon, it was demented toons, and then in Lost Continent, it was creatures of the evil creatures of myth and legend. And obviously in Marvel, it was villain. Yeah, they weren't too keen on the dead superheroes, which is why Universal has made sure since then to be on their game whenever it comes to anything related to Marvel. Because from what I understand, it came close for Marvel to be like, all right, we're done.
Not that, I mean, they signed a contract, so my guess is that they couldn't just pull it that easily if they wanted. Otherwise, Disney would have. But still, yeah, they weren't happy, is what I understand. And Universal respected that for the future, and it makes sense. But the one thing that I always think of when I think of Halloween Horror Nights, which is obviously a huge event for Universal Studios theme parks, if I were Disney, I would try to use any and all horror properties that Fox has or that they own and try and use it as a bargaining chip for Marvel Superhero Island and The Simpsons to go away from their parks. I think that this could potentially work if they were like, hey, you can use Alien, because let's face it, Disney's not going to do anything with these horror franchises in their parks.
The only franchise I see Universal wanting is Alien. But I believe they're doing an Alien TV show now. So Disney does
doing it?
Disney.
Disney's doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I honestly don't see any property from Fox that Universal would want that could replace Marvel. I think if I'm never going to say never, because, we could have, the Brer Oswald for Al Michaels trade down the line. But I think it's going to take a lot of money and not a franchise. I think Disney's going to have to come with an open checkbook, and Universal's going to give them a figure if they're willing to part with it. Because because with Horror Nights, as much of a big money driver as that is, I don't think they're willing to part with a year-round money driver versus a 2-month money driver. And on top of that, with the partnerships with AMC and WB and New Line, and on top of that, Blumhouse has been rocking it with horror properties, and they have a very good relationship with them. And now Jordan Peele. So
yeah,
they have other options, and of course the other caveat is they love creating original stories. There was a point in time where Halloween Horror Nights was just all original houses, and that was only headlined by either 1 or 2 movie properties. It wasn't until recent years where they decided to have most of the lineup, either all IP or half.
I mean, I gotta say, if I were at Disney, I would be racking my brain to try and figure something out. To be like, what can we give them that we will never use in the theme parks? And just, I don't know. Oh, I want Marvel and Simpsons out of Universal so badly. And I'm not even saying I don't like what Universal's done with them. I just have, it's just so weird in my brain. And like we said at the beginning of this conversation, most people probably don't care and or aren't even aware. I don't know, at this point, do you feel like people aren't aware that Disney owns them, or is just everybody? I'm so in the world of entertainment, I don't know what most people think when it comes to that sort of stuff.
I think there's a slice of the general public that when they go to Marvel Superhero Island and they see Captain America, they wonder, where's Iron Man? Or why does Captain America look like this and not like Chris Evans? Mm-hmm. I think there's a small portion of the general public that wonders that. But once they get on the ride, I think that thought goes right out the window. And on top of that, the demographic that really, that believes the real superheroes are too young to really, if mom says that's Captain America, that's Captain America.
Sure.
So
yeah.
I think what I would like for Universal to do is to, because they've been they redid Spider-Man, that was now almost 10 years. Wow, it's almost 10 years ago. Oh. And then they recently did the Hulk. I would like them just to maybe not make it look like the MCU, but at least modernize it. So that way both resorts can profit.
Now that's interesting because I like that it's so different from the way Disney deals with Marvel, because that's what sets it apart. Like, to me, that's Universal's Marvel, and then there's Disney's Marvel. I would prefer that not be a thing at all, but I do like the fact that they look so different. And honestly, I wonder how Disney would feel. I wonder if Disney would be like, cool, they're keeping it on brand, or yo, you're stepping on our feet sort of thing.
Can't really fight it. Look at, for example, the Hulk. The 99 Hulk coaster when it first came out was more 90s comic, and then with the redo, it was a little bit more bleeding of comic / oh look, it's kind of a nudge wink wink MCU kind of deal. So and Disney didn't have a leg to stand on because it represented the character. The
best bet that that Disney can wish for is probably that Harry Potter just continues to grow and grow and grow and grow until eventually it keeps creeping throughout the park and hits that corner where Marvel is. But let's face it, it's like the furthest point pretty much from Harry Potter. But yeah, that may be their best bet. It's going to be interesting to see. I am curious, like, if people at Disney are trying to figure out how to make this happen, or if they're just like, at this point, they're just like, it is what it is. We're just going to accept it and move on. Yeah, I think if it was going to happen, it would have happened already. I think at this, you think so? I think at this point they've accepted it is what it is, and I wonder if Universal's ever like shown Disney a number and been like, "Hey, you give us this number, and it's yours. It's out of here." And it's probably something really outrageous. And yeah. And after what they paid for Fox, I don't think Disney's looking. And of course, after the last year, I don't think they're willing
break that piggy bank open.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Now, folks, we got Marvel, we got Simpsons, we got properties from Halloween Horror Nights, all owned by Disney, but appearing in their biggest competitor's theme park, Universal Studios. This has been a super fun convo, but let's get to some trivia.
Do you know the answer? Get your brain gears churning and play along. It's trivia time.
Alrighty, Brian, do you want to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
You can hit me first.
All right, well, when Disney decided to retheme the Tower of Terror in Disney California Adventure, they knew that they wanted it to be a Marvel property, but they weren't sure which one. Which Marvel franchise was being considered before they settled on Guardians of the Galaxy?
Oh, it's got to be Iron Man.
It was not Iron Man, no.
No.
Nope. It was something that lived more in the world of course, it took over Tower of Terror, so it was in that creepy kind of mystic world. So it was something that fit more that.
Oh, Doctor Strange.
Doctor Strange was being considered, and eventually they decided that Guardians of the Galaxy was the way to go with that, and that's what they did. And, you know, it's a great overhaul of that attraction. It's really fun. I think it's fascinating how they took it and made what was a quote-unquote scary ride to a fun, just a really fun ride. I think it's pretty cool. But yeah, Doctor Strange was one of the properties that they were seriously considering for that before the idea of Guardians of the Galaxy came around. And like you said, thank goodness for Disney that Guardians of the Galaxy was a hit, because they are doing some, you know, good things with it in the parks.
Yeah, I was actually surprised. You know, I love Tower of Terror, especially, you know, Orlando being the best one. And so I was kind of bummed when they were replacing it. And then when I actually wrote it, I was like, you know what? Okay. I actually did like it more than I thought I would.
Yeah, I always say if they had done that in Florida, it would have been really heartbreaking, because not only is like Florida's version of the ride the best for Tower of Terror, but it's also, although I haven't done Tokyo's, but not talking Tokyo here, but you know, it's great in Florida, but also just the exterior of the building in Florida is so beautiful for the Tower of Terror. Whereas here in DCA, it was not as appealing to look at. Now, granted, the Guardians Tower is uglier than the Tower of Terror was, but that's a whole other thing. But in any case, what's your trivia question for me?
Okay. This is going to be because I'm a big Horror Nights fan. I figured.
Alrighty. I am a huge Horror Nights fan, but I do not claim to be the master of trivia when it comes to it. And I've been going to it in Hollywood since it, you know, revamped in 2006. I've gone every year since then. And then Florida, I missed last year, but I did like the 4 years before that. So let's see if I can do this.
All right. So it is in reference to American Horror Story being used.
Alrighty.
Okay. So in 2016 and 2017, American Horror Story was a part of Halloween Horror Nights. This is at least from the Orlando side.
Okay.
Usually, or at least back then, the creative team behind Horror Nights would tag them with a code name. What were the two code names for both years of American Horror Story?
You mean before they're announced to the public?
Before they were announced.
Oh. Oh, man. I have no clue. Give me a hint.
Crown.
Would you say Brown?
Crown.
Oh, Crown. In relation to American Horror Story, I have no idea. What's the answer?
In 2016, the codename was King, and in 2017, the codename was Checkmate. And that actually is...
Oh, so it's all chess stuff. Okay.
It was a wink to the fact of The Walking Dead no longer being their headlining property.
Interesting. I know The Walking Dead became overkill, man. That was so many years in a row. It was crazy.
Fun
Absolutely
fact,
nuts.
The code name for The Walking Dead in 2016, which was its last year, was Uncle, as in crying uncle.
Oh, that's hilarious. I love it. Well, Brian, this was a super, super fun conversation. Thanks for coming on to discuss the Disney-owned properties in the Universal parks. Before you go, why don't you let folks know a bit about Inside Universal and what you do over there?
Of course. Well, thanks for having me on, first off. So Inside Universal, we cover the Universal parks on both coasts. A little bit of Japan, but it's hard to, cover that, especially with everything going on. But mostly we talk everything about Orlando, Hollywood, Usually have backstories behind it. We did have a podcast at one point, but it's on hiatus. But you can mostly find us on Twitter at Inside Universal and on YouTube with the same handle at Inside Universal.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope you all enjoyed today's conversation. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, be sure and check it out as we discussed the new rules allowing Disneyland to reopen sooner than we may have thought. Next week, tune in for more Disney news and discussion, and the week after that, you won't want to miss out as I continue an Easter tradition here on DCTC. The easiest way to make sure you don't miss any of the magic is by subscribing to Disney Coast to Coast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Wherever you search, don't forget, it's Disney with a Z, Coast to Coast. You can find any links mentioned in this episode, along with ways to connect with today's guest, by checking out the show notes at DisneyCoastToCoast.com, or you can find a link to the show notes in this episode's description. Help ensure more free episodes of the podcast and gain rewards by joining the DCTC community at patreon.com/DisneyCTC. And don't forget to leave a voicemail at 818-860-2569 to share your thoughts on today's conversation and the chance to be heard on a future episode. Once again, that's 818-860-2569, or find the number in this episode's description, along with a link for some free gifts from me to you. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. This podcast is part of the DePodcast Network. Learn more about this show, plus find more quality and entertaining podcasts at DePodcastNetwork.com. That's DEPodcastNetwork.com.